Hi, I'm Jeanne Johns, and welcome to Risk Matters. It's our podcast on safety and operating risk, where we discuss leading high-hazard industries and share our lessons learned, all in our commitment to eliminate industrial accidents and keep people safe. Today, I'm really excited that we're actually shifting and looking forward to something that's just been dominating the news cycle, artificial intelligence, or AI. There's a huge amount of hype about this new technology, and I can understand why, because it's such a ubiquitous technology with applications in things such as healthcare, basic science research, energy, and manufacturing. And it's also going to have a big impact on both the operating model and the business models of almost every company out there. So today we're going to break down what do we mean when we say AI, and focus on its use in high-hazard industries, and how it will help us manage risk, as well as improve our reliability and safety. I am delighted to introduce our two guests today, Ron Dowdell and Mike McFarlane, who both have great experiences and perspectives on our subject today. Ron, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, Jeanne. First, really excited to be on the podcast today. Really appreciate the invite. I'm Ron Dowdell. I was in the Navy for 26 years, and when I wasn't a pilot or on ships, I was also the Chief Information Officer for Navy N1, which was basically our HR division that also handled training. And as part of that role, I was responsible for digital transformation over 2 years that moved a lot of our data and also a lot of our work processes to more of a modern systems and digital platforms. And excited to talk about this important topic with both you and Mike today. Thank you, Jeanne.
Yeah, great experience, and I can't wait to hear your contributions to the AI space. And Mike, over to you.
Hi, Jeanne, great to be here today. I originally hail from Dundee, Scotland. I have 35 years experience in the chemical industry. Everything from research to manufacturing, site leadership. So latterly for BASF Corporation, I was leading their digital transformation efforts in North America. So that was covering a manufacturing network of around 40 sites. And now I'm helping companies build and develop digital and AI strategies aligned with their business objectives.
That's terrific. Thanks so much, Ron and Mike, for being here today. I think the audience will get a huge amount out of your experiences and perspectives. I'd like to start with a couple pieces of context, because as I frame up this AI wave, I actually think about it as a third wave of digital transformation. I remember the very first one, which was with the internet and search engines, and that just drastically reduced the cost of information. And it seems like ever since then, we've just been inundated with loads and loads of information. The second phase I see is when information transmission became very easy and ubiquitous. And that's when we started seeing Zoom and Teams, and it just actually transformed how we communicate and move information across different mediums. And now we're entering the third phase, which is AI. And I see that as actually a drastic reduction in the cost of expertise. And that includes the time it takes to get to any particular level of expertise. And I think that's really going to be amazing and transforming. The second piece of context I want to share is actually the massive amount of investments that's been going into this technology. In 2024, $252 billion was spent in corporate AI. And in 2025, it's expected that it's going to be over $400 billion, and that's just for the tech companies. Through 2028, there's going to be nearly $2.9 trillion, yes, that's trillion with a T, that's supposed to be spent just on data center construction. And so I think that's actually going to really transform this technology. Because when you think about what we get for that level of investment, it's exponential growth in the capabilities. In fact, frontier AI agent capabilities are doubling every 7 months. So before we go into some of the use cases, I think it's actually going to be really helpful to be clear on terminology. Because I suspect I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I kind of use AI mostly as a Google Plus engine right now, even though I know there's so much more it can do. And so I think, Ron, I think it'd be really helpful to our listeners to talk about the differences, whether it's machine learning, large language models, agents, Gen AI. I mean, what does all that mean?
Yeah, Jeanne, great question. And I think it's important to start by noting that although AI is kind of in the lexicon of the day today, it's a technology that's been around for some time. Now, Mike, I'm not sure if you remember where you were in 1997, but at least my first introduction of this idea of AI occurred when Deep Blue, or sometimes referred to as Big Blue, IBM's first kind of learning machine, was asked to defeat the chess champion of the world, and successfully so. So this has been an evolution for some time. There's a couple of terms, like any other technology, as the technology evolves over time, different terms are used to describe their state at a given point in that evolution. So I think the first thing to note is this concept of machine learning. So, Mike, again, we're about the same age. I remember back in grade school programming computers on my Apple IIc computer and telling the computer how to operate. Well, the next evolution of that was machine learning. Well, instead of giving kind of instructions to a computer, you let the computer learn by itself. You give it patterns to recognize, and through that pattern observation, it can begin to predict and sometimes help with decision making. And that ultimately is a fundamental technology that brings us all of these technologies today. So machine learning really is fundamental. And you can see it in a lot of different areas, even today. Fraud prevention, the machine learning gets a sense of how you behave with your money. And then if there's something that's a little outside of the norm, it will highlight it and flag. The second area is this idea of large language models. So imagine a world where you identify patterns of data and then you try to incorporate language into those patterns. So large quantities of information, of language, are trained with these systems that now can generate content in the form of predicting phrases or providing full paragraphs of language content. A larger category is something called generative AI. So it's not just language, but also things like imagery or videos can be created with these kinds of tools. And lastly, I think is becoming increasingly introduced into the let's say the whole the universe of terms, is this idea of agentic AI. So not only can these systems predict language and produce language or produce videos or pictures, but they also can do things like read your calendar and identify meeting, build a agenda, and then take notes along the way, all independent of any human interaction. So the impact is quite significant. And I think the important thing to know, Jeanne, and the importance of your question is, if you have a problem you need to solve, it's also important to have the right tool. And if you don't have the right tool, if you're not sure of the right language, the tool to use, then you can be a little bit of an uphill slog, so to speak.
So yeah, I think Ron's covered that really extensively, really well. I'll maybe give you a couple of adds of things that I've seen recently, and particularly things such as hybrid models. That's where a particular approach of AI, like machine learning, is being combined with first principles physics and chemistry to really deliver additional insights beyond some of the Gen AI approaches. So that's becoming more common. Software companies also have the ability now to go out and search multiple AI versions, again, looking at time series data and machine learning, together with the insights from Gen AI, and integrate that information and give additional insights. So it's very dynamic. Staying current with the technology, it's really an ongoing challenge for everyone.
I can see actually how the rate of development's really making these boundaries, these definitional boundaries, sort of start getting blurry. But and the pace of change is just phenomenal. I'd like to segue into something maybe a bit more practical. Now that we have a good grounding on the definitions. And Mike, you saw digital transformation firsthand when you were with BASF. And, from my recollection, they were just at the forefront of applying digital tools to manufacturing. Of course, these were early days before we talked about LLMs and AI, but can you share with the audience your experience with BASF?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I believe BASF was really an early adopter of this technology. It came out of Industry 4.0. It recognized really the value, the potential benefit of not just digitalization, but AI, even going back to that time. Now, in North America, I mean, we had a production AI team. One of the challenges at the time was skill sets. There were very few universities or colleges that were building data science capabilities. So we took our production engineers, automation engineers, and we provided them with those additional skills. They then paired up with the plant personnel, went out and, I mean, solved some really great use cases and problems. I recall things like utility optimization was one, and being able to predict catalyst life cycle was another really important area, and things like raw material balancing. So even at that time, we had teams focused on looking at AI to solve these problems. And as you mentioned, this was long before Gen AI became such a big thing.
No, that's fascinating. And it does lead inevitably to the follow-up questions. I mean, where is industry now? I mean, as you talk to other companies and some of your clients, how are they thinking about digital transformation to improve their business?
No, great question, and it's moved rapidly. And what I've seen the last few years is a real polarization between leaders and companies that are still figuring out how to get started. I think there's some great use cases around reliability that's moved now from predictive analytics, thinking about when and will a piece of equipment fail, to actually prescriptive analytics. So the tools can provide some reasoned suggestions for corrective actions. That's become far more common. I think in the area of safety, some great use cases around computer vision for mitigating, for identifying and mitigating risk, both in the areas of occupational and process safety. And obviously with Gen AI, the whole efficiency that comes from accelerating basic administrative tasks. So some great things going on there right now. I would say the leaders, they've moved beyond thinking about the pilots where they've demonstrated value and use cases to system-wide, a new way of working. This idea of having a centralized data source where all the information's been brought into one place, contextualized, that's become an essential foundation from which you can then build apps, build digital twins, and get value from that. I know one company in particular that I would say is the leader in the chemical industry right now. They've done this and they've connected data across all their manufacturing networks, and they're getting insights from the plant that is then provided to their operational staff and their personnel to help them with the decision making. And their vision is that when someone arrives to work, whether it's at the start of a shift or at the start of a day, they'll get a insight from the plant saying, here are the things that we think you should look at today, based on this continuous diagnostic that's been going on in the plant. And I really think that's the future. That's the way work's going to be done in our industry.
Fascinating, fascinating. One of the things you kind of alluded to as we went through that is that, and I hear it all the time from people, is, how do I actually get started? They hear a lot about AI, but really struggle with how to get started. And one of the things I remember from previous digital transformation was that this need to clean up your data first. I can say as a board director, a lot of times we were presented with projects that actually had almost 2 years of just data cleanup, whereby you had to invest quite a lot and you didn't get anything for it because you had to clean up the data before you could actually implement things that would add real value. So that was a real deterrent in transforming businesses. We used to call it garbage in, garbage out. But I suspect there's still some truth to that. I mean, how does data cleanup fit into AI transformation projects today? Ron, I think it'd be good to get your perspective on this.
A great question. I will say when I was in DoD working as a CIO, this was the first question that always seemed to come up. How can we advance and adopt modern systems if our data is flawed? And, I think there's a lot of components here. I'll say from an industry perspective in the energy and chemical industry, many organizations are still working on paper. And that, we used to say, the more hands that touch data, the more likely you're going to have errors in your data. So if you want to reduce the need to clean up, start by reducing the input of bad data to begin with. So your strategy on collecting data and digitizing where you can, getting off paper, many companies have to start there as kind of like, I would say, the first direction of travel. The second thing I think it's really important to know, data is important. And to Mike's earlier point, you really do need, if you're going to take these leaps in operations and change of organizational dynamics, you do have to start with a good foundation. That said, there's plenty of examples of companies and organizations that try to boil the ocean, so to speak, and almost put off and delay needed improvements because the data just isn't perfect. This might be a surprise to many. The data will never be perfect. You're always going to have degrees of error with your data. And the question is, how much can you tolerate in order to drive value from organizations? Again, one of my examples from the old Navy days, and of course, I'm going to show a bad example. It'll be an example about the Army. There was a system about 10 years ago called IPS-A, which the Army, and I think well-intended, attempted to take all the data from the National Guard. This is personnel data, and use that data and standardize it, because they had all kinds of different personnel and information systems, into one central location, and they can use that to make pay more efficient. Pretty important thing. Well, that was 10 years ago, and right now the personnel side is pretty good, but exceptional expense. Last time I checked before this podcast, it was somewhere around $600 million they put just in getting the data right. And that's about 10 years. I think they went live about 2 years ago. So 8 years of work and a lot of money. You've got to be able to provide and show more value earlier, or what typically happens is these efforts will get canceled because organizations can't tolerate that much time and that much extent without showing some kind of value. The last thing I'll offer, the technology really has changed. So although there are ways to reduce the need for data cleanup by having good data entry and data collection, there's also acknowledgement that it can't be perfect. There are tools out there today that many of the large tech companies have applied that can reduce data cleanup by anywhere from 60 to 70, 80%. If you listen to one large company, they'll say 60% of data transfer, or I should say technology transformation efforts fail because of bad data. So you do have to get it right. But, there's the Goldilocks thing. It just has to be right. And there are tools to help you get there a lot faster than had previously existed. Mike, your comments on the data piece, what has been your experience on getting the data just right?
I think you're right, Ron. The first step is obviously the digitization piece. But this cleanup and contextualization, there's a lot more help. I think to your point as well about, you don't have to wait a year, 2 years just working on data before you can move ahead and maybe do some pilots or get some quick wins, get some use cases going. You don't have to wait on that perfection. I absolutely agree.
Well, it's great to hear that there is some help in getting the data right, because nobody wants to spend too much time only doing data cleanup. So it's nice to know that you can work a little simultaneously and get some value faster, and that there's some tools that actually help you clean up your data, so you can use the applications of AI that actually adds value. As I'm thinking about starting, I know sometimes I've heard, Mike, you talk about maturity assessments as a good way to start. And I'm thinking about, in some ways I think I know what you mean. But I mean, what exactly is a maturity assessment? And how do you know you get a good one that's really useful in mapping out where you want to go with AI?
Absolutely. And again, it's another example of something that can be done in parallel, and data cleanup can happen in some use cases. But I think it's really important to truly understand where a company exists from a data standpoint and how that's going to work into their ultimate strategy. I mean, in its simplest terms, a digital maturity strategy would say at level 1, that's the papered, siloed systems. You either don't have the data or you've got some data, but it's not really well connected. All the way up to level 5, that could be highly autonomous operations, concepts such as dark factory running, and everything in between. And knowing where you are helps a company understand then what the next steps would be. Now, there are many digital maturity assessments out there. A lot of the time, though, they're just purely technical. What I like to do is start with a conversation really about business value drivers. So what's important to a company? Is it reliability? Is it safety? Is it productivity and cost? Is it workforce efficiency? And then build the digital maturity assessment around those areas. And again, what that really helps a company understand is what's the value in this? How's AI then going to enable them to improve relative to those business value drivers? So the approach also evaluates technical readiness. So it is important to know, what is the current state and stage of your data, and also cultural readiness. I mean, there are times that companies have gone full in and really, their efforts haven't been well received. So doing some kind of assessment, people surveys, culture surveys, to know what are some of the barriers that might exist that you can then think about, identify, and position a company for a more successful outcome. I think all those wrapped together cover that, maturity assessment approach.
That's fascinating. I can certainly see the value in knowing where you're at, but more importantly, within the context of your strategy and what's important to your business. I mean, I think back on the other eras of digital transformation, such as the dot-com era, which is sort of my reference point. And I do remember at the time that quite a few people did sort of these 1,000 points of light strategy, so to speak. Believe it or not, we didn't know how to use the internet or how that could drive value for the business. And so the idea is that, kind of everybody go forth and prosper. And there was a huge amount of different pilots and experimentation going on across big companies. And I've heard you talk, Mike, about pilots. So kind of what's the role of experimentation and pilots in a fast-moving technology versus kind of following a plan and having a plan for implementation?
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, there's a term out there that's become a little bit cliche. People talk about pilot purgatory. And what that really refers to is, taking a look, say, at a particular use case or a particular piece of software, testing that out, making sure that the people that are working with it build the confidence, they like it, they see the value and they see the benefit. But what frequently happens is after one pilot, then, the next plan to the next site says, oh yeah, we'll do a pilot as well. And before you notice, 2 years in, all you've really done is pilots. And the value of digitalization AI comes from scale. So being able to take a pilot and prove it out, learn the lessons from it, which is really important to do, to extract the lessons learned, make the changes at that point in time, and then scale fast, move towards enterprise-wide adoption. That's where the success is. Once the pilot's done, build out a roadmap. What's the plan for the next 5 years? What are the solutions that we're going to put in place? Related to that, I would say another challenge companies have is really around whether do we build this internally or do we look externally and bring in suppliers? So other considerations such as scalability, support and service beyond the pilot, these are all things that companies have to work through. But putting together the plan makes that a lot easier. And I think working with someone who's navigated those decisions in their own career, maybe understands the right questions to ask when determining that can be an invaluable resource to ensure that a company adopts the right approach for their business.
Yeah, I mean, I think, understanding your strategy, and I guess it comes back to my next question, just leads from what you just said, is, I think the choices can be a bit overwhelming. Things are moving so quickly. A lot of people don't understand the fine distinctions between some of the different types of technology in AI. And so, Mike, when you talked about a concierge service to help with AI partner and technology selection, can you kind of explain what that entails and why clients find that useful?
Sure, Jeanne. And I mean, you used the term overwhelming. I think it truly is. I think as I speak to people in this industry, everyone's really struggling just with the volume and the expansion of service offerings. There's 70,000 companies worldwide that are offering some kind of AI solution. 17,500 of those alone are based in North America. There are webinars every day. offering a solution. I don't know about your LinkedIn feed, but mine, every second post is about someone offering expertise in prompting, right? So it's just, to your point, the term overwhelming is particularly appropriate. So how do you make a start with all that information out there? So I started the Technology Concierge service, which really involved bringing in some industrialists similar to myself as advisors who have been through this process of hearing the pitches, of understanding the technology landscape, of knowing the right questions to ask when someone is making their pitch and selling that, to know if that's going to be a good partner for a particular company. And I think that's going to be invaluable for companies to have someone that can help navigate and guide the overwhelming complexity of partner selection. And ultimately, it will reduce the time to value. So it's going to accelerate that AI strategy.
Yeah. And I think with that, I'd like to move on to implementation, talking about getting to the value part of it. Because in my opinion, this is always an underestimated effort. People are talking that AI is going to add $19.9 trillion to the global GDP by 2030. 2030 is not that far away, believe it or not. But, to get this benefit, you actually have to implement successfully AI in order to get the benefits. And I think change management is always one of the biggest challenges. And Ron, I think that's right up your expertise. So how do you think about the key to actually making the implementation and change management of AI work?
Yeah, Jeanne, a great question, an important one as well. And I'll go back to something Mike said. It all starts with strategy, and it's a lot easier to implement an important change if the strategy is right. And Mike's this description of pilot purgatory is fantastic. And if you get it wrong, I think this is important to note, if you get it wrong and you end up having too many pilots and they're not managed, what are some of the fallouts of that approach? Well, from my perspective, my old kind of world, what that means is you have a lot of different, let's say garage projects going on with sometimes using the exact same technology from different vendors. And over time, you end up with maybe buying things that you already have multiple times over. So about 2 or 3 years later, someone comes in, the new board shows up, or new leadership shows up in the management team, or a new technology team shows up, and they look around and they end up saying, well, the next thing we have to do is rationalize, which is take a look at all this stuff and get rid of about half of it because we didn't need it to begin with. So the strategy is really, really important, step one. Second piece, none of this is different than any other innovation from my perspective. Like if you're going to innovate, which means you're going to have, you're going to implement some kind of change, there's some basics, whether it's, the Cotter model or other change management models, they all apply. They're very similar, but they all start somewhat the same, which is, what is the need for change? Why do we feel that there's value in leaving predictable behaviors and predictable process to something that's new and different and maybe, a little scary in what it might look like for this new reality? Leaders have to be able to identify that and underwrite the risk that comes with that change as well. So, I think step one, we think of change management, what's the need for change? And secondly, who is going to articulate and underwrite that new reality? Typically, it's a CEO. If it's a lower level kind of change effort, it could be lower, but it has to be someone who is going to put their name and reputation to the need for doing something different. The second thing, typically you'll find, is there has to be a new reality. We have to create something new. Sometimes it's with one of the tools we're talking about. Sometimes it can be simply as a management and organizational design change. You have to have a team, typically a cross-functional team, who involves portions of the business. So it could be operators, it could be crafts, it could be engineers, someone who understands the day in, day out activities that drive value, I believe have to be part of that creating the new reality. That cross-functional team is I would say, some of the hard work and important work when it comes to crafting something that not only is different and new, but also drives bottom line performance. The rule I would typically have when we're doing this kind of work, it's so easy to get lost in scope. If you can't identify and describe the value of a project in 1 or 2 sentences, you're probably going down the wrong road. So scoping it's important, getting the right stakeholders involved in the development. And then the last piece, and probably the most important, is execution. I've seen many great strategies have a great solution integrated with technology, but if you can't execute, it does not matter. So ensuring that you have good feedback loops, good feedback mechanisms, and accountability, and someone responsible for that delivery of execution, I think is critically important in the last phase of getting this right and getting the value and the promise that, Jeanne, you suggested we should be seeing in about 30 years. And I will hold you to that, what was it, 1.7 or $17 trillion of value 5 years from now.
Absolutely. And I think I think about I'm not sure who's I count the 19.9 trillion, but anyway, but I do think that as we think about the execution, you talked about the execution there, Ron. I do think one of the risks of that is the resistance, because, kind of as I started with, this is all about, you can become a fairly good expert on things much, much quicker than you used to. And as I think about the experts I've known, that's part of, their identity as people, that they've spent their lifetime becoming experts at a particular thing. And now a lot of their knowledge is going to be easy to come by. And so I do find, and that's not to even mention job loss or whatnot. So I can see that this could be very threatening to people. How do you think about the resistance and how to get through that?
Well, first, it's a great question. The resistance is real. A lot of studies suggest right now that there's discomfort within the workforce. There is fear about job displacement. That's a real anxiety the workforce has today. Now, all that said, I think there's a couple of things we can do as benchmark. If you listen to the futurists, we look ahead maybe 30, 40, 50 years, we'll all be replaced by robots and AI. So we can just acknowledge that might be our future, but it's not anytime soon. As you look where we are today, that's not anywhere near the problems that these tools can help with. What we see by and large as we go to sites and manufacturing organizations, too many frontline workers, too many mid-level managers are spending way too much time on managing routine tasks that can be offloaded through these tools. And, for many times, many frontline workers, they need to be spending more time in the field. These technologies can, in essence, unlock the best parts of their talent in areas where they really should be applied, which is working with people, managing risks, identifying hazards, and not behind a computer doing routine tasks that we can now offload to these tools. So I would suggest near term, if you're going to get value again out of these tools, you have to have a strategy of communicating to the workforce, describing how it adds value for them, and then lastly, making sure you make good on those value promises when it comes to implementation.
I can see the value of augmenting your job and kind of getting rid of a lot of the pieces I can remember that I didn't enjoy doing. Mike, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I did just to build. I also believe that it's not a case of will jobs go away, but will jobs change? And I think it's more the latter. I'd looked recently, actually, over the last 30 years, people in employment globally has been steady at 40 to 42%, and unemployment rates have been around 5%. That hasn't changed for 30 years, despite all the changes we've been through now. Okay, this is a new world. It's very difficult to predict the future, but I really believe in the technology side, jobs are going to increase, and healthcare jobs are going to increase. Trades and crafts, I've not seen AI change a light fitting yet or fix a leak. So there are going to be roles, but I think there is a challenge for companies and for people to think about skills that they have and what skills do they need to develop in this new AI-driven world. And I think workforce development and retraining, that's going to be a real key to success for companies going forward.
Absolutely. You can see a lot of new jobs being created, but as you say, every job's going to change, except for maybe changing the fittings in your plumbing system.
Yeah.
But I do think that, being very alive to that and actually giving people the skills so they don't feel a victim of AI, but they actually see it empowers them and allows them to do a lot more than they could before.
Yeah, and maybe one add just on that as well. I think the role of the human skills and the people skills will become increasingly important, whether that's critical thinking or dealing with ambiguity, leadership skills, empathy. All those are things that I think ultimately are going to differentiate skill sets for people and to be successful. So just a quick add there. Sorry, Ron, cut you off there.
No, and just another ad. There's an old saying, innovation only travels as far as trust. And a lot of these things we're talking about right now is how do you maintain trust with the workforce? We already highlighted that there's anxiety. As a leadership team, as a management team, you have to be able to identify the ways these tools will add value and in a way that's benefit not just for the organization, but for the individuals as well. If you're unable to do that, as trust is undermined, innovation will slow as well. So I think there's a virtuous cycle here. It's not one or the other. It really does have to be both.
No, that's terrific. I mean, I think we're getting close on time now, and it wouldn't be a risk podcast without talking about the risks involved. And I do believe that AI reduces some risks, but it does introduce new ones. I mean, I've heard a lot of being called hallucinations, like false and misleading information that sometimes these tools can give you. I mean, how do you think about how high hazard industries should manage this? I mean, why don't we start with you, Mike?
Absolutely, Jeanne. And I think it's helpful in this to think about risk in two different kind of ways and categories. Because in our industry, you talk about risk and there's a concern. But the reality of it is the traditional process safety systems that take care of plants, whether that be controls and interlocks, pressure relief systems, process safety management protocols, inherently safer design, all that stays. All that remains an essential important part of our industry. I think why risk has come up with respect to AI is because people hear about these hallucinations and think, oh, well, is it going to be a wash of inaccurate information? And I think it's still going to be a case of augmenting. The ability to provide insights on existing data from AI, I think, is going to help more than it's going to hinder. And I'll give one recent example where I saw a company that's developed a digital twin of their real live asset. And if there's a problem in the plant, that information gets relayed to the digital twin. The simulator that they have then processes and maybe offers 2 or 3 corrective actions back to the plant. So then in the control room, they've got ideas, they can evaluate it, they can look at it and say, hey, we've got some suggestions on how we can correct this deviation. Now that happens in minutes. Previously, that would involve a group of people, engineers, technical staff, sitting around a table, looking at the computer screens, looking at all the data to try and figure out what's going on. So I think that's an example where it can really be helpful. But because these are learning models, they improve with time. That also means they're not 100% accurate from the outgo. So I think the human oversight is absolutely key here. When those recommendations are made, a qualified person with the right experience, the right expertise has to ultimately make the decision. And I don't see that going away for some time. Now, this is a very different way of operating in the industry compared to how it used to work. So I think people, need to be retrained, roles need to be redefined in this world, and new expectations reset.
Yeah, Mike, I couldn't agree more on the risk side. I see 3 areas of risk. You identified one. And I couldn't tell you how many times I've heard organizations say that, there's the tools are great, but they're not accurate enough, so we don't think we can use them yet. And to your point, all the systems we have some degree of inaccuracy. The question is, as we adopt these new technologies, how do we put the right controls in place to mitigate those risks? So I think that's one piece. The second is, the data piece, which is, how do, many organizations have concerns about proprietary data kind of, leaving, the fence line, so to speak, and being accessible by those in ways that reduce their competitive advantage. And I think that's a real concern that organizations should address. I would say that if organizations to be successful, the first thing they have to do is ensure they have an enterprise solution for generative AI. In essence, if you don't have something, if you're not offering your workers to use a system to generate text or data. They'll go it on their own and use some other system by and large, and that's where data really comes at risk. So ensure you have an enterprise solution so they can use things inside the fence line. And the last risk, I would say, is the risk of inaction. Many organizations, again, it's overwhelming, it's too much, concerned about the data. If it's not 999% accurate, I don't want to touch it. Well, I mean, that's one way to look at it, but just remember that same philosophy I remember in the early 90s when computers were coming online. And you can't imagine today not having a computer at a workspace and being productive. So these tools will be adopted. The question is to what degree, and frankly, if you're a laggard and not at least part of a leading adopter, you could be in a situation as an organization you're no longer competitive, and that's probably the real risk for all of us.
Yeah. No, it's a little bit like Kodak ignoring digital phones and cameras. So, you can easily get left behind, especially as fast as this is going. I mean, I do think this is a growing issue as well, or it's going to be one that continues to challenge us because I do think now people are pretty alive to the risk of bad data. But as these models continue to improve, they're going to get to the point where, quote, they're almost always right. And I think it's human nature to become really complacent when the computer keeps telling you, oh, you should do this now, you should do this now. And really staying alert to that risk is going to be a leadership challenge into the future. The other point I wanted to make in high-hazard industries is that a lot of people who develop AI will have a different risk appetite. We deal with things that explode and are toxic, and so our risk appetite is close to zero, or as close as humanly possible to go to zero. And so kind of it's on us to make sure that we put the right safeguards in place that's commensurate with that low level of risk tolerance. But I do want to end on a positive note about how AI, if used correctly, I think will really reduce risk and perhaps even drastically. The analogy I'm going to use is with self-driving cars. Perhaps that's because I went to San Francisco on my summer holiday and I just enjoyed going across the city on Waymo. But there was a recent study done by Waymo and the insurance giant Swiss Re. And they showed that self-driving taxis had 88% less property damage cases and 92% less injury claims per mile. So, when we think about it, if you get the right handrails, I think we could actually significantly make plants safer and really fewer industrial accidents. And so with that, I think it's time to wrap up. Any final words from Ron and Mike?
I'll start, Jeanne. This is an exciting time to be involved in this kind of technology and with organizations. And, my big takeaway now is the tools are there, the problems are there. So the question is, how will leaders apply the right tools to the right problem? I think ultimately that's the biggest question facing organizations today. And the degree to which you get that right, I think ultimately will define the degree to which you'll be successful as we move forward the next 5 to 10 years.
Absolutely, Ron. And not much to add on that, but other than to say, I think this, the concerns that are out there, I think the advantages far outweigh the concerns, and the value again of people and skills, and those human skills going forward, married together with AI, it's going to lead to a real exciting and interesting future. So look forward to continuing the conversation, Jeanne.
Very good. I agree with all of that. And I think it's unlikely that this is going to be the last podcast on AI. I think it's going to be that, monumental to our industry, as well as changing that quickly. So I'd like to thank our listeners today. And I'd actually encourage you to share with us your experiences with AI to manage risk and keeping your people safe. So until next time, stay safe.